And welcome back, everybody, as per normal. And today we're going to talk about one of the more interesting and dynamic figures in history, and also fairly controversial, and that would be Alexander the Great and the Macedonians. Now, before we talk about the life and times of Alexander, we need to talk about the history. He was from an area called Macedon, which, if you follow the mouse, is right up here. Okay, and Macedon, the people are basically Greek, okay? It's the northern part of Greece today. They were mainly shepherds and farmers. They did a little bit of trade, and they had clan issues. And what do I mean issues is that they tended to disagree. There was a lot of infighting between the clans, like we've seen in other groups, especially a lot of nomads, except these guys weren't nomads. And as a result, there wasn't a lot of unity. The Greeks kind of looked at them as like their backwards hill people cousin. They were from very mountainous region in Macedonia, and the Greeks, in all honesty, they would trade a little bit with them, but really thought they were kind of uncivilized and weren't too worried about them. Well, they should have been, because there was one guy who decided to take offense, if you will, to that approach to them, and that would be King Philip II. Philip II lived from 395 to 336 BCE. You see there we have the nice pretty statue of him, and then this is actually based off a skeleton that we discovered, thinking that we may have actually found his tomb, which I'll talk about more in a moment. But it was said that he did have one eye that he lost in battle. Now, he is going to be able to unite Macedonia. And when we say unite Macedonia, we're talking about he was either able to defeat his rivals in battle or was able to cut deals and give some upper class guys some power to formalize and create Macedonia. He did a lot of military changes as well. He adopted the Spartan phalanx, which is going to be really, really important, and we'll talk about why a little bit later, as well as the use of light cavalry. In other words, this fast-moving cavalry, along with the formation that the Spartans used, really made them dominant. And from the years 350 to 338, he is able to basically increase his holdings, and finally he will conquer Greece. The only group that he doesn't conquer is Sparta, and that's because he basically made a deal to make them a subject kingdom without having to try to fight them. And as you can see here, this is quite a large empire that he would end up conquering. Everything in red is his. Okay, Epirus was an ally, so they kind of went with them, but Macedonia was still in charge. And you know what, Philip, this is a pretty sizable empire for 2,500 years ago. It's pretty, significant. Eventually, however, he was killed by a slave, and there's a lot of mysterious circumstances over that assassination. Some people think Alexander, his son, was involved. Some people aren't sure, but nonetheless, Philip laid the foundation for his son. Now, he did die in 336. We again said perhaps a slave, and we have actually found his tomb. This is actually the door of his tomb near Vergina in Greece. We've found it about 20 years ago, but through lots of verifications, this and out, and we've actually found where one of the great kings of antiquity was buried. Now, on to his son, of course, which is what this is all about. Now, he is the son of Philip, and talk about getting an incredible education. His tutor was Aristotle, probably the smartest man of all in all of antiquity, and really you might figure 2 or 3 people that were more gifted than him all time in actually volume of work. Now, we'll talk about him a little bit more tomorrow, but Alexander was incredibly educated, and the interesting thing about his education is he was very enlightened in the sense that he didn't look at other people as barbarians and things along that line, that he was kind of open. He got incredible amounts of military training, and really by the age of 18, he was a general underneath his father. He was an accomplished general. He did a lot of positive things, and so when his father died, Alexander was ready at the ripe old age of 23. What does he want to do? It's really simple. He wants to conquer the world. In particular, he wants to conquer Persia. And what made him a little bit different is that we're going to see he has better weapons, he has better tactics. Alexander is the first person ever to really use engineers and bring them to deal with the the terrain or any other issues that might have to come up in battle. And his role was very functional. Alexander was a leader. He led the cavalry. He typically led the decisive charge in any engagement. He fought, and his men saw that. And what he was able to develop was a loyalty, for the most part, from his men, that they were all willing to die for him. And even though they were outnumbered most of the time, they tended to win. Really, you have a couple amazing things that Alexander and his people invented. The first on the left is the gastrofet, which is basically like a belly crossbow, as you can see here, but it would fire all metal bolts that could actually pierce walls. And really destroy just about everything. I mean, it would blow a man off a horse, it could destroy a horse, just absolutely devastating. On the right, you see Alexander leading a cavalry charge, and they would actually use heavy cavalry. The Macedonians bred large horses that could just do amazing amounts of damage. But the big thing was the Sarissa, this like 20-foot long spear that these men would train with. And when combined with a phalanx, you basically couldn't even get anywhere near these guys. You could pluck a man right off a horse. It would actually really neutralize cavalry attacking them, and they just were unstoppable. So really, how did the path go? What did they do? Well, the first battle started at the Battle of Granicus, which is in modern-day Turkey, and that was significant because that was when Alexander was able to kick the Persians out of modern-day Turkey. Then they went down to Tyre, which was actually, as you see here, a little island off the coast of really modern-day Lebanon. So Alexander brought in his fleet to try to hold and keep them in. There was a wall around the entire island. They were able to build a bridge, or known as a mole, to get to it, fire gastrofets, attack at another area, and knock over this island. And then he went south and conquered Egypt. Egypt was crucial because it gave him grain and a lot more supplies. The really key battles after this were the Battle of Issus. In the Battle of Issus, which is depicted here, this is actually a fresco from Pompeii, he was able to defeat Darius III, who was the last Persian emperor, and he then took Syria, some more of Egypt, and the Holy Land. But the key battle was the Battle of Gaugamela, or in modern-day Iraq. In this battle, Alexander, with only 50,000 men, absolutely destroys Darius's 250,000 men, and Persia is absolutely gone. Now, he never got to kill Darius. He was probably going to capture him, but Darius was assassinated by one of his generals, Bessus. Bessus thought he would be, luckily enough, and that Alexander would like him, but Alexander, kind of an odd guy, was enraged by this and actually had Bessus killed, because no one kills a king but a king. A little bit crazy, but he's not going to stop, as you can see here. So around this area right here was where the mouse is at, was where he defeated in Gaugamela, and he continued to drive to Persepolis, and then came up, looped around, finally drove all the way into India, where he ran into elephants and elephant cavalry. Now, here's what we're not exactly sure what happened. According to legend, some say he was defeated, some say he actually cut a deal. The evidence doesn't look to him being defeated. The evidence looks to him having the upper hand, but the fact of the matter is that his soldiers did not want to move on anymore. They had been marching pretty much at that point for about 9 straight years. They wanted to go home. And he faced King Porus of India, and from the evidence we have, he probably cut some type of deal, was able to smooth things over, and then returned to the city of Susa, where he was actually planning to invade the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabs were not very united. Now, if he invades that peninsula, who knows if Islam ever happens, but he never got the chance. What was really interesting about Alexander was his character. We really do think this guy thought he was actually a god. This picture from the movie Alexander, we know that his mother pushed forth this belief that she was actually impregnated through Zeus and some kind of snake. Like she slept with a snake who was Zeus and gave birth to Alexander. A little bit crazy. But Alexander kind of started acting like this. He always acted like he could not be killed. He constantly put himself in danger. He would often have people bow to them or bow to him as he walked by, and sometimes even kiss the ground. And it's quite possible that it really explains a lot of his attitudes, and especially one of the major mistakes, that this guy maybe really didn't even think he would die. Really, really interesting character, and if you ever get a chance to read up on it, I would suggest it. Now, unfortunately, as I said, for him, he was planning on invading the Arabian Peninsula, where he just straight up died. What comes down to us was that he died of a fever, so probably something like malaria. But for him, what was crazy was that everybody afterwards thought it had to be like poison or assassination or something like that, because Alexander was this great, powerful god and it was incredible. No, he caught a fever, couldn't shake it, and he died at just 33. Now, we have to look at Alexander and his impact in two ways, good and bad. Negative, he really broke stuff. Like, for instance, the great city of Persepolis, by all accounts, was considered to be the most beautiful in the world. After they defeated Darius III and took the city, they actually had a party in Persepolis and got so drunk they burnt the city down to the basically to its base, and there's almost nothing left of the city today. Alexander absolutely destroyed everything that was in his path. And then when he died, he made the foolish mistake of never actually naming an heir. So there really was no such thing as an empire of Alexander because it fell apart the second he died. We talked about how the Marians over here took over. Then you have Seleucus and Armenia and Antigonus and Lysimachus and Cassander and Ptolemy and all these generals. They all took a piece, but they all wanted to be Alexander. So then they start fighting and fighting and fighting. And then, of course, they start fighting and they all get knocked off by the Romans. Go figure. But you led to an era of like 100 years of just like war and destruction and death and all that because Alexander couldn't just name an heir and say, hey, it's my son. He didn't even name his son, who unfortunately ends up getting killed. However, the positive Alexander is that he actually built lots of cities. Now, most of them were named Alexandria, the most famous, this being the picture of Alexandria in Egypt and the Pharaoh's lighthouse, which I'll talk about later in another presentation. But he built cities in which people could trade. My personal favorite city was the city of Bucephalia, which was named after his horse that only he could tame and also allowed him to be more of a god. But if we look at all of these cities, if you see here, he used Damascus, Alexandria, Susa, all these Alexandrias, Bucephalia. Alexander had no stereotypes. He looked at the Persians as actual equals. He didn't see them as barbarians. So there was no issues he had in working with them. They blended the cultures. He actually did take a Persian bride for a little while. Her name was Roxana, who actually killed other people who were trying to assassinate Alexander, so that was cool for him. He also had many of his soldiers wed Persian women. The trade networks were absolutely were huge and extensive between all of these cities and would increase the Silk Roads that we'll be talking about later. He spreads tons and tons of ideas. We learn so much that they are able to spread knowledge about medicine and architecture back and forth, and a lot of that will eventually influence Rome and allow Rome to grow. And so what you see in Alexander, his influence was in sharing culture and ideas, which again we'll be getting to and showing kind of how the things really influence, as I said, the next group we'll talk about Rome. But as an empire builder, he didn't do it. He conquered a bunch of stuff and then died, and as a result of his death, a lot of other people killed everybody else. And maybe he's just famous because he never lost a battle, and maybe he's just famous because we all think he's cool. I don't really know, but in the end, you know, it was still pretty impressive, and he had an incredible impact on a short run and even for about 100 years afterwards. All right, remember to have your questions done, comment on the video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.